And Noah says, like, to succeed in this sport, you need main character energy. Do you agree with Noah that it's 100% sort of necessary in a sport like elite sprinting?
I agree with Noah to a certain extent.
I recently sat down with Joe Ferguson to understand what really goes on in the mind of an elite sprinter. Joe has represented Great Britain and has previously ran at World and European Championships. In this conversation, we cover alter egos, pre-performance routines, playing mind games with your opponents, and so much more. Joe also runs his own YouTube channel, which honestly is one of the best out there to reveal all the behind-the-scenes stuff of what life is really like as an elite athlete. So be sure to check that out too. So let's get started.
Well, yeah, Joe, thanks ever so much for joining me. So when it comes to elite sport, one of the first things I always like to ask athletes is what % of their sport do they think is mental and why?
That's a good one. And I think, well, on paper, it should be 50-50, right? But I definitely think it's more towards the mental side of things. It's something that everyone will have heard at some point. I think you're looking close to 70-30, maybe even 80-20. So we'll go in the middle. We'll say 75% mental. And the reason why is I've been in positions where I've been in physically great shape, but if you don't get your mental game right on the day of competition, then none of that counts for anything. And the times where I've performed well, I can think back to pretty much any time where I've had a really good performance, and it's where my mental game has been the strongest on the day. You can talk yourself out of things. You make mistakes due to lack of focus, lack of confidence, all of these kind of things. And no matter how good shape you're in physically, that's going to let you down if you don't get that on point. So I'd say about 75%.
Has there been any sort of like major lessons along the way that have sort of shifted that over time where you've thought that the mental side is actually more important?
Yeah, I'd say probably just from years of practice, years of like highs and lows of the sport, you kind of learn that your mental fortitude is like the most important thing, especially going into like big competitions where you have to like commit to the performance. I've had a lot of times where, especially the 200 meters is my main event. And over the years, the times where I've not performed to my best ability, I've had an issue with committing to running the first half of the race. Because in the 200, you start getting a bit of fatigue in the last 50 meters. And subconsciously, I've tried to conserve energy before, as opposed to just taking it out. You have to really make the most of that speed in the first half. And there's been times where I've taught myself out of going for it subconsciously. And the times where I've ran my quickest is where I've just disengaged my brain and just gone and just really just torn around the bend and come off. And I found that the times where I've really full sent it, I've not been as tired. There's been times where I've been running scared and it almost drains the energy out of you even more because you're wasting energy thinking instead of running.
So I take it, obviously just from seeing some things in your YouTube channel, there's clearly a few things that you do sort of like mentally to prepare. I know you're a big fan of music. You've always got the headphones on. So yeah. What does your kind of like mental routine typically look like before big races?
So in terms of a mental routine, before competition, I go through a few like set things that I always like to do. I try and incorporate as much of it into my training as possible. And this might be a bit of a controversial one because some people like to distinguish between competition and training, but I like to have that routine and almost practice these mental routines that I do. So first thing that I like to do, I do a lot of visualization, and this is just in general. This is what I mean in training and in competition. I'm thinking about what I want, and the music is a massive one for me. And in competition, I'll have my music playlist that I'll listen to, and I have certain songs that I listen to at different stages that can just trigger some kind of, it just allows you to kind of switch on. I'll have like a couple songs that I listen to right before I take the headphones out, and it just gives you that mental cue and it lets your body and mind know that it's time to go. So I'll purposely not listen to it until I need it for that specific moment, and it just kind of wakes you up. And then when I go out onto the track, I know what I'm ready to do, and I have that mood kind of set. I try and dissociate from myself that's here sat in the chair right now and almost employ a bit of an alter ego subconsciously, not giving it a name or anything, but I try to dissociate from Joe, just normal Joe that walks around pretty relaxed, pretty laid back guy. And as soon as I hear that last song, it's like I've left that guy in the stands, and you send the performance body out to go and do what it needs to do. It helps you disengage your brain from overthinking, and you send out like the warrior to go and do the job. And then you join your regular body at the finish line.
Yeah, and really interesting you mentioned sort of like alter ego there, because I was actually watching the Netflix sprint documentary the other day. There's a clip of Noah Lyles and Zarnell Hughes, and they're having a pre-race interview. Obviously Zarnell's a lot more relaxed, a bit more sort of calm, a bit more of a shy guy, I guess you could say, compared to obviously Noah, big showman. And Noah says, like, you know, to succeed in this sport, you need main character energy. I think obviously what he's referring to is that kind of alter ego, you know, sort of tapping into that. So what advice would you give to athletes who are perhaps maybe a little bit more introverted, maybe just kind of a lot more sort of calm and relaxed, sort of like day to day? How do they really sort of like tap into that elevated self, that kind of main character? And do you agree with Noah that it's 100% sort of necessary in a sport like elite sprinting?
I agree with Noah to a certain extent. I think you have to figure out what works for you. For Zarnell, what he does obviously works for him. He's performing at a very high level. He'll have a team around him and he knows exactly what he needs to do to get the best out of himself. But I do agree with Noah in the sense that you need to have something that takes you away from your normal self. You need to feel different, because that heightens your senses. It gets you ready, it gets you into that peak flow state. I would feel like I'm probably similar, because like I said, I'm a very laid back person generally. But when I get onto the track, I can just feel that switch. And you've got to have something where you can flip that switch so that you let your mind and body know that it's about to do something different and you need to get the best out of yourself. So in terms of the main character energy, I would definitely say you need to have that. How that manifests into your behaviors and how that comes across to other people is individual. But what's going on internally, definitely you need to be stepping out onto the track thinking that you're the best and you're invincible, essentially. I know personally, when I've had that mindset going out onto the track, that's always the times where I've performed the best, where you just go out and just think you're untouchable, because it just casts out any doubt in your mind. And the more time you spend thinking, the less time you're actually focused on what you need to do. And I think Noah Lyles gets a lot of hate for the way it manifests in himself, but I think everyone needs to realize that it manifests in different ways. I've had the pleasure to meet him a couple times, and he's totally relaxed in person. He's a very chill guy, very down to earth, very humble, and has the time of day for everyone as well. But then you see him on the track, jumping around, screaming, shouting. Everyone assumes that that's just how he is 24/7, which is just not the case. I know that he has a therapist that he speaks to, and they must obviously speak about how they're going to get the best out of him. And it's this persona that he's built that everyone sees on the track. It obviously works for him in major championships, but that's not how he is around the clock. So it's about finding your behaviors, what you feel comfortable with, and what gets the best out of you. But whatever he's doing is working, so he's going to keep doing it.
And just kind of again on this general theme of alter egos, game faces, it's all centered upon these kind of like different identities that you kind of like have to have in elite sport. And I know that we've spoken about this in our last call together. So how do you, as a sprinter, manage to basically separate those kind of identities of like everyday Joe and then the elite sprinter Joe?
It almost helps to make your alter ego so far detached from what you normally are, so it's easy to kind of slip into it as a persona or a role. Because if it blends between what you normally are and what the alter ego is, you can struggle to flip the switch and actually turn it on. When I've done a bit of research around it, I found that it's easier for people to have some kind of cue, whether it's a physical, tangible cue or something that's just mental, to help them switch on. For me, a big one is I always race in sunglasses, reflective, like gold-coloured Oakley sunglasses. And I've been doing that for a couple of years, and I started doing it the first season where I started running really quick and made my debut for the senior team for Team GB. And it just became a thing, and it's become like my thing on the track. So every time I race, like as soon as the sunglasses go on in the call room, they're kind of like reflective. No one can see your eyes. No one can see what you're looking like, your body language. And as soon as the glasses go on, I walk out onto the track, and it's like you just transform into this character. It just kind of switches on. It helps you flip the switch into the alter ego, which is like you're ready to perform. But a lot of people will use different things and little things that people do that they don't realize, that when they'll slap their face, they'll pinch their wrist, they'll do something like that. It's to kind of wake up. It's like an activation cue, I think you'd call it. Something like a call to action to wake up this persona. So having something physical that you can do, something you can wear, some kind of body language behavior to get that out of you, I think is key.
I was really interested you mentioned the sunglasses point, because it not only helps you, but it can also sometimes like hinder the opposition, as you're saying, like they can't see what you're seeing. You're looking around. I know Josh Kerr, the 1500 meter runner, he does the same with the sunglasses. So
Yeah.
it kind of delves also into what we know as the dark arts, so to speak, where we sometimes also need to play the occasional mind games. And I've sort of heard that sometimes when it comes to sprinting, there can be all kinds of things going on. I heard one good example where as you're sort of lining up, getting into the blocks, just pinching a little bit off the sort of track and sort of like flicking it into the next lane, just to kind of distract the guy next to you. So these things obviously like do happen, and I'm just curious, like to what extent do they happen, and do you think these are fair game, you know, to get that advantage? Because at the end of the day, you're wanting to, yes, run your race and run your very best, but you're wanting to reach podiums, you're wanting to win medals. So what's your kind of take on those dark arts?
I think 100% it's fair game. It's not something that I partake in so much myself, because again, that's just what works for me. I see it as, even if if I'm wearing the sunglasses, even if I think that it's putting off somebody else, that gives me confidence. So even if the person that is in the call room with me is completely unfazed by what I'm doing, if I convince myself that I'm in their head, then it gives me an extra lift. It's like you say, it's a mind game, isn't it? You're convincing yourself that you're the best, and you're wanting to convince everyone else that you're the best as well. So regardless of what they think, all you have to do is think that, yeah, if everyone's scared of me, then you're just going to keep lifting yourself up. So the dark arts, whether they work on anyone, they might not work on the other 7 guys, but if you think they're working, then they're working. The time where I experienced it the most, I was actually a junior. It was at the Junior European Championships. This was 2019. In the call room before this, and like I said, I was only 19. This was my first major international. We get into a call room and you're in like quite a tightly confined space with, 7 other athletes. And this was my first time competing at a big international. So you have the language barrier, a lot of foreign athletes. And this was the first time we'd been in an actual call room. So for anyone that's not been in a call room before, sometime it's just like an area where you sit or stand, couple chairs, and if there's heats, there might be people with like a fence separating you in the next heat. Whereas this was like a physical room, 4 walls, small room, 8 chairs, and the officials come in, check everyone, and then they leave for like 5 minutes to do what they need to do. And the second that door closed, everyone stands up at the same time. So 8 guys before the 200 meter heats, everyone stands up, everyone's looking at everyone else, nobody speaks. And it's almost like something out of a movie. I don't know how this happened. And one guy started walking, someone else started walking, and we ended up just all kind of looking at each other, walking around in like this circle of like sharks swimming around. Nobody could say anything because of the language barrier. Everyone's just watching. And it was probably the most intense situation I've ever been in. I've been to the World Senior Championship since then. That was nothing like it. It was way more relaxed. But I don't know why that happened, but it was some kind of cue and someone else followed it. Things like that could easily rattle somebody if they're not ready for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to get some of those behind the scene things. And I think that's where, a lot of the mental side is so important. It's not actually when you're racing, going down the lane. It's everything before and sometimes even after. And I know that one other thing that a lot of particularly track and field athletes have to deal with is those periods of waiting. Yes, there's the kind of waiting the few minutes before a race in the call room, but there's also sometimes hours and hours in between heats, for example. I know that in your video on I think it was the English Champs, where you've got the morning heat and then you're not racing again for 4 or 5 hours. So yeah. What do you actually do to keep the mind not necessarily distracted, but keep it calm, keep it composed, not use up too much mental and physical energy? So what's your advice to athletes who really struggle with that sort of agitation that can often come with just waiting around?
I think that is the key, staying relaxed and not getting ahead of yourself. It's so easy, especially when you're in between rounds. All your senses are heightened, your arousal levels are like through the roof. And you can't maintain that for the entire day. You have to come back down. You have to relax. Otherwise, you're just going to end up crashing later on in the day. And that's something that I've learned over time. I used to love getting super pumped up first thing in the morning because you're excited to compete. You've got that bit of nervous energy and you're just like a tightly strung rubber band ball ready to go. And I've learned over the years that you have to kind of dial that down, because when I go to training, I'll be super chilled the whole day, and then I can put my headphones on whilst I'm warming up and get myself super ready to go. So I kind of thought, all I need to do is that, but just in competition. And sometimes people try to do different routines that they wouldn't normally do because it's competition. Your mind can't be in fight or flight for 8 hours the entire day. You need some downtime so that you can actually reach that peak. Otherwise, you're just going to start tapering off, and you have to almost rein yourself in. So yeah, maybe listen to a bit of music, but yeah, like you said, distract yourself really without being too technical. You kind of are distracting yourself from what's going on. So for me, sit down, probably watch some YouTube videos, try and feel like I'm just doing a normal day. So eat some food, relax, lay down in bed. When I'm on the circuit and we have a competition at like 7, 8 p.m. at night and I'm in a random country, I'll go for a mid-afternoon nap, relax as much as possible so that when I leave the hotel, when I get dressed, I've got my competition tracksuit on, leave the hotel door, that's when the competition starts. Otherwise, it just becomes such a long, draining day. Yeah. And then when you put rounds in between it, it's a lot to take in.
100%. Yeah, because what I say to a lot of my athletes is this idea of domain detachment, where before a competition, you're kind of like a parked car. It's not yet time to drive. So if you're just sat there with the handbrake on, you're revving the engine, you're just using up fuel at the end of the day. It's not yet time to actually go. So actually get out of the car, return to it in 3-4 hours. But as you say, go listen to music, guilt-free, bit of video gaming if necessary, or watching something on Netflix. And then, as you say, there's a right time to start dialing things up. Even if you're physically not doing much, you can burn yourself out sort of mentally so that you're just completely spent, by the time you actually hit the blocks. And I think, a lot of athletes learn that the hard way, don't they?
100%. I've been victim of doing that as well, definitely, especially when I was younger, going down to like national champs. We've got a competition called English Schools, which is like the school kid age national champs. And there'll be times where we've done the heats and semi-finals on day one, and then the finals are on the second day, and all the teams stay in a hotel together. You'll come downstairs, it's a bunch of like 18-year-olds competing for the national final, and I'll come downstairs in the morning with my headphones on, thinking like I'm basically in the call room, looking at all my competition. They're all looking at you, and everyone's like ready to go, and it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, like you said, that's a really good analogy with the car. I think that's definitely it. You're just burning fuel that doesn't need to be burnt. You have to find a way to dial yourself back and use it all when it's needed in that one big burst, instead of just stretching yourself thin mentally.
And then so just sort of shifting gears, Joe, I know that obviously with your YouTube channel, when you first started it, I know you were hoping to have incredible sort of season and share all the highs, but I know that obviously past season for you, unfortunately, has been filled with maybe a fair few more lows. So how have you, over the past year or so, really sort of changed your relationship with failure? Because we've sort of seen that in real time on your YouTube channel.
I would say it's definitely changed a lot in a way that I didn't really expect. I probably wasn't ready for it at the start. I've accepted it more as a way of like letting go now, because I kind of spent most of the year trying to hold on really tight to my dreams and my goals that I set at the start of the year. And it got to the point in the last video how I mentioned that I ended my season, and it was just a big weight off my shoulders. It was a constant battle of chasing where I want to be, and the goalposts were moving. So as I was getting closer, something would happen and I would be chasing again. And it got to the point where it was just exhausting. But having the YouTube channel to document it, it was interesting, because before I started making YouTube videos, something like that, like this season, would really affect me in a bad way. But having YouTube as an outlet to share the story as it's happening, I kind of thought, well, in the first video, I mentioned that I want to be authentic. I want it to be a true story of what's happening, because too many people share their story as like a highlight reel. And that's something that, over the last few years, everyone's pretty familiar with now. Social media being a bit of a facade, people just showing what they want to show. I thought, if I'm going to do this, for me to have like a USP, I want it to be a genuine story. So in the end, it kind of came out in a good way, because the story wasn't what I wanted it to be, but because the story's right in itself, it's there, and I'm just there to show everyone what happened. And I found a sense of peace in that, in the way that I've done what I can do. And I had a lot of support from people as well. I think because I was super genuine about it, I did my best not to make any excuses. I just showed it as it was and thought, well, people will understand. I've had a few injuries, made some mistakes along the way. Things didn't go to plan, but here's what it is. And showing it from the point of an elite athlete, I wanted to hopefully relate to other people. And I think I've succeeded in doing that. And ending the season, I was picking up a little bit of momentum. I ran my season's best towards the end of the season, and I was ready to go even quicker. I was picking up, wasn't injured anymore, which was good. So even though I did end the season with a little bit of another injury, I'm excited going into next year, knowing that one, it's very tough for it to be a worse year than this year. And two, I've learned a lot of lessons. So I've learned a lot of lessons in patience, resilience, and not panicking as well when things start to go bad, because with everything that's happened this year, I know that there's always a way back. And when I look back, I've always had a pretty bad year before having a really brilliant year. So I think taking the lessons that I've had from this season, I'll be able to implement those into next season and hopefully just push on even further. It just gives me more gratitude for when things go well. I think it's very tough to take losses when you're not used to it. And this year, I've really taken a beating on the track. So everyone else seeing the journey, I think me and people that have watched are all pretty excited to see what happens next year. So I'm just more grateful and excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, definitely. So am I. So I know you touched upon there as well, like injuries obviously have been a bit of an issue for you in the past. And, it's obviously the worst thing that can happen to any athlete, right? There's one thing kind of like losing, but not even being able to get on the court, pitch or track. That's arguably worse. So how do you manage to stay committed during rehab from injury? And the reason I use the word committed is because motivation comes and goes. We all know that. And there's going to be days where you wake up where you just can't be bothered to do the rehab. You feel like you're not making the sort of progress that you're looking for. So how do you remain sort of committed to that process of coming back stronger, particularly after a serious injury where you've been out for 3-4 months?
It's definitely tough. I think you have to have some form of structure behind it. That's something that I'm a massive advocate for, structure. And I see it in a way as you're committed to a long-term goal, and a lot of people, everyone wants to run fast, right? So you do all these things, you go to competitions, you train hard, but dealing with injuries is part of that process. So you need to be prepared to have a structure for when you're injured and when you have to do things that you might think are boring or things that might not matter. And it's very easy to throw a season away or throw a few weeks away because you're injured and you can't be bothered to do anything. But it's that time where it's super important to be diligent about what you're doing. I see it as a way of, it's not wasting time by doing other things. I see it as a way of investing your time. So investing into doing things that you wouldn't normally do. I've had a few situations where I've actually come back from an injury quicker than what I was before, because you get time to do things that you don't have time to do when you're in full training. You get to work on little weaknesses. So I had a calf injury at the end of 2022, December of 2022. I had a grade 2 tear in my soleus, which took about 5 to 6 weeks to fully heal to get back running. And when I did get back running, I took about 1/10 of a second off my 60-meter timing gates PB, which absolutely destroyed what I was doing before. And it's because I'd been focusing on strength and conditioning massively. I was way stronger. My power to weight ratio was really good. I'd strengthened the soleus way more. So when I came back, I was basically just stronger. And I'd had that little bit of time to focus on these little intricate elements that when you're in full training, you kind of just don't get a chance to focus on everything. So you have to see everything as an opportunity. Nothing's been taken away from you because there's always a way back. And I've learned that from having so many setbacks. And the thing is, there is always a way back. I've had a situation where I didn't step foot on the start line for an entire year because of injuries back and forth. And the year following that was where I ran my PBs, went to the World Championships, ran my 200-meter PB that still stands at the time of recording. So all through this time, it's an opportunity to build and work on things that you don't normally have. It tells you, it lets you know how bad you actually want it as well. It's very easily to go down the slippery slope of not doing what you need to do. So I think being injured, you have that opportunity to check yourself. And I think you have to be honest enough with yourself to do that. Ask yourself that question of how bad do I want this? To what degree am I going to be able to push myself? To what lengths am I going to go to make this happen? And when you're injured, it's a brilliant opportunity to test yourself. If you can push through that, what I like to do is remember the lowest points that I've had, because when you bounce back from them, you can look back and say, if I can bounce back from this, I can bounce back from the next thing.
Just on that front as well of mentioning like how bad you really want it, I think kind of one thing that athletes really struggle with the higher they sort of climb is that the margins for improvement get smaller and smaller, right? So when you first start out in a sport, you're making leaps and bounds after every training block. But in your case, you know, you're getting to a point where with every sort of passing season, you have to do more and more work for even smaller of a gain, whether it's, you know, a tenth of a second, you know, a few hundredths of a second. So again, how do you stay committed to putting in more effort, even though the results actually become sort of smaller and smaller in terms of the margin of improvement?
The way I see it is the reward changes in terms of the stakes are a lot higher at the moment. The current Olympic and world standard qualification is 20.16 in the 200 meters. A couple of years ago, when I went to the World Championships, it was 20.24, and I set a PB of 20.23 to qualify. So fine margins, as we're talking about. And for me, so I'm looking at gaining just under a tenth of a second, slicing that off my PB to qualify for the next World Championships. And you might think, all that training for a tenth of a second, is it worth it? But the answer is, yeah, it's definitely worth it. It's the difference between me being sat at home or being at the World Championships competing through the rounds. And then once you get to that standard at 20.1, you're just over a tenth of a second away of running sub 20. Even if you run 20 flat, you're talking a couple hundredth of a second between 20 flat and joining one of the most elite clubs in track and field, the sub 20 200 meter club. And then once you're at sub 20, you're a tenth or two away from getting on global and Olympic podiums. So even though you're gaining less time, the margins are so small at the top, as we mentioned, to where even a tenth of a second can be the difference in huge achievements. So that's what drives me forward. And it's almost more motivating in a way, because now, since I've ran 20.2, my ultimate goal is to run a sub 20 200, even though it's just 2/10 away. It equates to a couple meters over 200 meters. It almost feels so close to where you want to give that extra push, because you almost feel like you just need one little push to get over the line. It helps you be more patient because you can feel it right there. It's almost right ahead of you. And you've got to try and utilize that to help you push on instead of feeling frustrated, because it's better to be in this position than to feel like your goal's a million miles away. So you kind of have to hang on to the feeling of something being right in front of you and give it all that you've got, because if you fall just short and you've not given everything, you'll always think that if you just gave the extra couple percent, it would have been enough. So that's kind of what keeps me going.
So one last kind of like final question. If you could give yourself some advice when you're a bit younger, what would you say to young Joe when it comes to making a start on improving your mental game? And what would be some of the first steps to take?
That's a really good one. There's probably so much that I could say to my younger self. The first thing that I would probably say to give myself a bit of confidence is just say to myself, look, you're going to run faster than you can even possibly comprehend at this stage. So enjoy competing and just soak everything up to the point where you're constantly learning, and just be looking forward for the future. Because, like I said, you're going to run so quick that I can't even explain what it's going to mean to you at this moment. I remember when I was a kid, I was happy just to represent my county. Running for Team GB was never even something that crossed my mind until I was probably 18. I would just say, have more confidence whilst I'm running, get over the fear of running the 200 as well, and really embrace it. I spent a lot of years trying to convince myself that I can run the 100 rather than the 200, which I believe is my calling and it is my best event. So I'd tell myself, embrace the 200, find a way to get that confidence, accept your strengths, which is my speed endurance, and apply yourself properly. Don't waste your opportunities, and be grateful for the years when you're healthy, because you're not going to be healthy all the time. Whenever you can step out onto the track, healthy, ready to run, it's a massive opportunity and it's a blessing. So grasp it with both hands and take every race seriously, and just really make the most of every single opportunity.